Dell's new G15 gaming laptop is probably one that you should consider buying, but there are at least 3 important issues that you need to be aware about first. The first main problem that I've got with this laptop is the screen. Most of the lower configurations come with a 120Hz screen, and I measured it with a lower 22 millisecond response time. And this is actually quite low, similar to many other 60Hz laptops that I've tested. Basically, just because it says it's 120Hz on the spec sheet does not mean it's going to offer a smooth gaming experience. There's more to it than that, like the response time. Now, I don't think I'm someone that's actually that sensitive to a slow response time screen, but in pretty much every game that I played on this machine, I did notice blur while just moving around. Now, although this is the first of 3 major issues that I've got with the G15, you can at least fix it with money. Dell also offers the G15 with a higher tier 165Hz screen, and that has better color gamut, higher brightness, and faster response time. It's just all around a better panel than the 120Hz one I've got here. Now, it seems to vary by region, but here in Australia, you can't actually buy the AMD Ryzen model with that faster 165Hz screen. The 120Hz screen is the only option available unless you go for Intel. So it seems kind of weird that you have to go Intel in some countries if you want the better screen. Fortunately, that's not the case in the US market though. It is possible to buy the AMD Ryzen version of this laptop with the faster 165Hz screen, but currently only the top end spec with the RTX 3060 comes with that. At this time at least, it doesn't seem that you can get the better screen with the 3050 options. But hey, hopefully this changes over time, so refer to those links in the description for updates. Alright, so that's one of 3 issues covered. Let's move on to number 2, and that would be the slower X16 memory. Now, my G15 shipped to me with 2 8GB sticks of X16 memory and dual channel. You might want to check out this video later if you need the details, but basically memory with X16 banks is slower than X8. And up until this year, most gaming laptops seem to ship with X8 memory. It's only really been in 2021, the year of supply shortages, that a lot of laptop companies have had to resort to using slower X16 memory. And that's just simply because they can't buy enough in bulk. It kinda sucks because you can see in this example that with this simple memory change, we can get a decent boost to average FPS in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. So basically with the memory that the G15 ships with, we're basically leaving performance on the table. Now fortunately, like the screen, this is something that can be fixed with money. If you really want to, you can go out and buy some more memory and upgrade the laptop yourself. That said, I'd probably test it out first and see if it's actually something you notice before you go and spend more money. Because honestly, when I was testing this thing out in different games, it was playing quite well even with the default memory. It was one of the better RTX 3060 laptops that I've tested, only very slightly behind the more expensive Lenovo Legion 5. The Legion has a slightly higher GPU power limit, which is why I suspect it gets the win. So those are 2 of the 3 major issues covered. Just to recap, we've got the slower screen, but that can be upgraded with money, and the slower memory, which again, fortunately can be upgraded with money. The third problem is a bit more difficult to tackle, and if you're familiar with Dell's past laptops, you're probably not going to be too surprised to hear that it's thermals. Basically, when under heavy CPU plus GPU workloads, I found that both the CPU and GPU would thermal throttle. Now, I guess before you write it off entirely, it is worth considering those game benchmark graphs shown earlier. Basically, it shows that despite the higher temperatures, the G15 still stacks up quite well compared to others. And to be fair, the area where you actually touch and use the laptop didn't feel that hot to the touch, it was just the internals. But yeah, I know a lot of people don't like seeing 100 degrees Celsius on their CPU. Technically, this is within the AMD spec, so it should be fine, but there's no denying that this is higher than other laptops. Personally, I don't think it's the end of the world. It'll depend on the workload you're running, and generally a higher thermal limit means more headroom for performance. It's a trade-off. I did try running the G5 with the cooling pad, and I found that in many cases this could lower the temperatures a bit. Again, it just depends on the workload. There might also be other things you could do, like changing the thermal paste, but I haven't investigated that yet. Alright, so those are the 3 issues that I had with the G15. Now let's hear about the good stuff. It's got an 86 watt-hour battery inside, so not quite the maximum 99 watt-hours possible, but regardless, it was still offering the best battery life I've ever seen, lasting for more than 12.5 hours in my YouTube video playback test, a seriously impressive result. It is worth noting though that the cheaper G15s have a lower 57 watt-hour battery, so expect lower results with that. And I should also note that if you do get the faster 165Hz screen, that does draw a bit more power too, so the battery life might not be quite as good with the better screen. The other thing that I'm glad Dell has added to the G15 is a mux switch. Check out this video if you need the details, but basically this lets us disable the integrated graphics and Optimus to get a speed boost in games. And this is partly the reason why the G15 was doing so well in the games earlier. Unfortunately, you can only enable or disable it through the BIOS rather than the software, but considering most laptops need you to do a reboot anyway, I don't think that's a big deal. I was also pleasantly surprised by the build quality. Despite this thing being all plastic, it didn't feel that cheap, at least compared to a number of other all plastic gaming laptops that I've tested. And it's also got 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, which I'd consider to be a more premium feature. It is worth noting that the 2 USB Type-A ports on the right-hand side are USB 3.2 Gen 1, but only in the RTX 3060 model I've got here. If you were to buy a lower spec RTX 3050 or 3050 Ti model, then those two USB ports would be the slower 2.0. Anyway, all things considered, I think the G15 is worth considering for the price. At the time of recording, it's about $80 less expensive compared to Lenovo's Legion 5 with similar specs. And as we saw in games, it did perform very closely to it. Check out this video next to see all of the differences between Dell's G15 and Lenovo's Legion 5 gaming laptops. I've compared pretty much everything you can think of, so I'll see you in that one next. Otherwise, if you're new to the channel, then get subscribed for future laptop reviews like this one. Oh, and I guess if you want even more information on the G5, then check out the full review on my main channel here, as I go into more depth.